Good Wednesday morning, friends, or afternoon. I'm going to adjust my camera here just a second. Good Wednesday, friends, or afternoon, or evening, or later in the week, whenever you happen to join with me. For those that I may not know, I'm Reverend Jennifer Finley, our Momentum and Discipleship Pastor here at First United Methodist Church in Kirksville, and this is our time together each week to simply pause in all that swirls in our week, to take a deep breath, to pause, to ask and wonder together where and how is God meeting us individually and collectively, in what swirls in our world and all the things that are going on. How is it that God is meeting us? These last several weeks of summer, I have been sharing about what I am, at least for myself, considering the season of green. The season in the church year where we are in a long stretch of common time. The season in our collective lives together, at least in Northeast Missouri, where it's summer. At least here in Kirksville, it is hot and hazy as the Canadian smoke from the wildfires has come our way finally. So I'm filming from inside today. It's a little bit easier to do that. Well, this is a season of green. And as we've been entering in this season together, on our Wednesday times, we've been reflecting about what practices of faith, what are those tangible things that we do or that we practice that reliably connect us to God in this particular season, acknowledging that sometimes those change, often those change season by season by season. And so as I was reflecting on this week, as I was thinking about where and how God is meeting me, I realized that God met me in a coffee mug. Now, hold on. I know those of you who know me well know, one, really, Jennifer, you have plenty of coffee in your life. I know. And if you saw my cupboards at home, you would know I have well more coffee mugs than a single person living by herself actually needs. So I'm not sure that I need more coffee or more coffee mugs. And yet, God met me in this coffee mug this week. Hope you can see that. There's a beautiful tree on here. It's a work of art. It was, I first ran into this coffee mug, or one very much like it, in last September at the Red Barn Arts and Crafts Festival here in Kirksville. Those of you who are from this area know it's often a beautiful, wonderful weekend, and lots of artists are here displaying and selling their craft. And I have a soft spot for pottery, so I usually allow myself maybe to browse the pottery. This year I saw a mug from this same artist with this tree on it, and ultimately I decided to purchase something different. But it was always in the back of my mind, oh, I wish I hadn't missed out on that mug. Now I think a good friend actually bought it, so that gave me joy. But this last weekend I was in Columbia, Missouri with a friend, and we were browsing a local art store gallery that had mugs and pottery and other things by local artists, and this mug appeared. And I picked it up and I debated and I thought, well, do I really need another coffee mug? All of that. And my friend said, if you let go of it once and it's still calling you to you, maybe you should buy it. And so I did. And while this is simply a piece of clay, it is also a work of art. And there's something in it as I've been drinking my coffee these last few days, as I've sat on my porch with this, as I've looked out over the sunrise, as I've gone through my days, the hard parts and the good parts. This has been a companion. And this tree, this sense of a tree of life that may resonate for you, a tree that has deep roots down here someplace, a tree that is fully in bloom in this particular season. There's something about that and that image of trees and growth that has been calling to me, and God has met me in that. It reminded me of the practice of tending. Now, last week we talked about this practice of creating, how we're created by God in God's own image, which means we're created to create. And we talked a little bit about what it means to be creative in ways that perhaps our culture doesn't recognize. And we talked about what it means to create along with God. But this week I've been reminded about the practice of tending to things that perhaps we didn't create. One of the other things I've been doing this week is caring for a friend's cats and yard while she is away on vacation. And it's a simple task. Many of us do that for our friends and family when they're away in the summer. And it simply practically involves putting out some cat food and watering a few plants in the backyard. And yet, as I've been in the evenings turning on the hose and watering the plants that I did not plant, the garden that's not mine, I found God meeting me there in that really simple act of standing and watering, tending to, giving growth to, or providing the opportunity for growth to something that I didn't create. There is a deep spiritual practice in that, and I wonder if you've run into that too. There is something about tending and seeing growth in something that perhaps wasn't something that we created on our own. And so I'm wondering, what are you tending to? What life are you tending to in this particular season? It could be relationships with friends. It could be taking that time that you feel like maybe you don't have to tend to a relationship, new or old. It could be caring for a family member. Now, we know that sometimes that caring can be overwhelming. There are other times in life when that tending and that caring for a family member can be life-giving as well. It could be watering plants that you did not plant, like I am doing. It could be, for me, watering plants and hoping new life sprouts from my own hanging baskets on my porch that sometimes get a little rough this time of year when I forget to water them. Or that spiritual practice of tending could be tending to ourselves and the life within us. If that's a practice that our world doesn't always value deeply, that tending to our own life and our own growth, that looks different for all of us. But it is a spiritual practice. It might be lingering with your cup of coffee in the morning and simply allowing yourself to have life for a new morning. That's me. But it could look entirely different for you. It could be going for a walk. It could be all kinds of things. It could be watching a good movie or reading a book. But I'm wondering for you, in this season, this particular season, what does the practice of tending look like? And where are you tending to things that you did not create, but are life-giving to you? I was reminded of a scripture passage that often we hear out of context a little bit. It's from 1 Corinthians. Paul writes, "What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you came to believe as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth." I love that passage. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. Now, in context, Paul was running into some tricky situations where the church that he had started, the seeds that he had planted were a little complicated. People were having complicated relationships with each other, and it was a new time, and things were topsy-turvy, and people had questions. And Paul goes on later to write more about how they should relate to each other. But at the end of the day, he uses this beautiful image of what I like to imagine as a tree. In that context, someone planted the seed and someone else tended to its growth. But ultimately, it was God. It was God in all kinds of forms that gave the growth to that tree. And so, friends, I hope and pray in this next week that you have something to tend to. Maybe that's yourself. That's good. And if that's not your season, maybe you're tending to someone else's plants or animals. Those are ordinary activities that sometimes remind us of the ways God shows up as we tend to things we didn't create. So whatever your tending looks like this week, I hope to hear about it. Maybe put something in the comments or a picture, or stop by and say hello. We'd love to hear those stories, or send us an email. Whatever you're tending to, know that God is there with you. Go in peace, my friends.